This is the beloved Etch A Sketch. You rotate its knobs to create some fine line art. However, if you make a mistake, you need to shake the whole thing like a maraca and start over again. But what if there was a better way? Well, now there is, thanks to the TekaSketch. The TekaSketch has a much needed undo button, but it can also play some simple games. How did I build this and what else can it do? Find out today on Tekavou. Hey everyone and welcome to Tekavou. Today's episode is all about the Etch A Sketch. Now, I love the Etch A Sketch, but have you ever tried making a circle on this thing? It kind of feels like you're trying to use oven mitts to do surgery. I pretty much always go in the wrong direction multiple times, and I always find myself restarting from scratch. Drawing a terrible 2D car is completely out of the question for me. Today we're going to solve that problem once and for all. We're also going to give the Etch A Sketch some 21st century features while also preserving its no Wi-Fi stance. Before we begin, we need to know what the rules are before we can break them, so let's find out how an Etch A Sketch actually works. It's a common misconception that the Etch A Sketch is drawing black lines, but that's actually not what's happening behind the scenes. Picture this. You're at the beach and you're soaking in the deadly rays from the sun. You place your finger in the sand and you start to doodle. You're not actually drawing, are you? You're simply displacing the sand. And that's pretty much what's happening in an Etch A Sketch. An Etch A Sketch is essentially just an aluminum dust beach trapped in a box. When you rotate the knobs, a complicated pulley system is moving the stylus around, and that's displacing the aluminum, sort of like your finger in the sand. You're, wait for it, etching a sketch. The black that you're seeing is not actually ink, it's just the absence of light. There is nothing behind the aluminum on screen. When you make a mistake, you shake the device and the aluminum recoats the screen. It's sort of like when a tide comes in and erases your sand sketch. Knowing all this, you can kind of see how complicated an undo button would be. The stylus would need to be equipped with a small little vacuum. The vacuum would suck up all of the aluminum dust, retrace its steps, and then put everything back grain by grain. As a parent who's cleaned up his fair share of glitter disasters, I'd rather build a 3D printer inside a snow globe than open up an Etch A Sketch. Still, this is a potential solution, so we'll jot it down. We also need to make sure that this solution works with our future plans for the device. But first, a relevant backstory. This story takes us back to the mid-early 1990s. My oldest brother had a 386 computer that ran Windows 3.1. The computer had a physical lock. There was no username or password, you actually had to use a key to get in. I didn't really know what a computer or even ethics were at the time, but this was a challenge and I needed to get in. Like many kids in the 90s, I was constantly bored and trying to find new things to do. So I grabbed the paper clip and I tried to MacGyver my way into the computer. Kids, don't do this at home or away from home. The internet wasn't a thing yet, so I had to rely on whatever software came preloaded. On there was a game called Nibbles.bas. You might not be familiar with Nibbles, but about a decade later, when cell phones came out, they also lacked the internet. Many of them came with a game called Snake, which is what Nibbles is a clone of. The concept of these games is very simple. You play as a snake who likes to eat fruit. Every time you eat, you grow in size like the very hungry caterpillar. You basically keep eating while avoiding the maze that your tail has created. Nibbles was loads of fun for like 15 minutes. What made the game interesting though wasn't the endless gluttony, it was the fact that it came with a source code. I had no idea how to code, but I knew how to change numbers around. Before I knew it, hours had passed, and I had created my own special version of Nibbles. I creatively named it Nibbles2.bas. I also didn't know what copyright was at the time. My brother came home and found out instantly, but surprisingly, he was cool with it and he let me use his computer from that point on. Fast forward a few decades later and I find myself with kids and they're playing with an Etch A Sketch. I then got one of those epiphanies, you know, the kind that you get when you're lacking sleep and you think you're more clever than you actually are. Isn't an Etch A Sketch basically an endless version of Snake, where you never stop growing and you constantly lose by going in the wrong direction? That ridiculous question led me to an even more ridiculous one. What if you could actually play Snake on an Etch A Sketch? And that, my friends, is how the concept of Tekavou was born. A few months have passed and I'm trying to figure out how to get my Etch A Sketch to play Snake. I'll be honest, I don't really want to create a little vacuum, but let's focus on the Snake functionality a little bit. I drafted up a few concepts to see how this idea can actually work. The first idea was to use an iPhone and AR. The plan was to have a phone on top of the Etch A Sketch as you played. You would look into the phone screen, which is tracking your position in real time, and it's displaying all the fruits that you need to eat. It kind of worked until it didn't. The contrast of the screen wasn't great, and the phone had to be in the perfect spot, otherwise it wouldn't work. I spent quite a lot of time on this prototype and I didn't make it very far. Next idea, what if I made the tracking more precise? I replaced the knobs with a gear system that was attached to two rotary encoders. Much like the digital crown on my Teka clock project. Now your position can be sent directly to the phone. But at this point I realized I'm pretty much just playing Snake on my phone, and the Etch A Sketch is just a fancy controller. It defeats the whole purpose of this project. Okay, fine, let's remove the phone from the equation. What if instead the fruit was already printed on transparent sheets, like those old school projector slides, and we attach those to an Etch A Sketch? Because nothing screams 21st century upgrades like projector slides. Thankfully, I was smart enough not to pursue this idea because it still doesn't solve the biggest problem. The snake doesn't move on its own, so there's no sense of urgency. I thought maybe a timer, but then the screen wouldn't be able to display the time. So what if we added some sound to it? Morse code? A snake charmer flute? Yeah, there's a reason I shelved this project for almost a year. I knew I had to move on. I had invested weeks and I had nothing to show for it. Which brings us to today, where I find myself in possession of an e-ink screen. You know, the kind that powers your e-reader. What if I just left the Etch A Sketch alone and build my own version from scratch, the TekaSketch? I could ditch the gear system and use the rotary encoders directly, and I really do wish I had thought of this earlier because it makes so much sense. The screen not only looks like the Etch A Sketch, but the drawings persist even when you turn it off. So that's a new plan. We're going to build the TekaSketch. I designed it to mimic the aesthetics of an Etch A Sketch because it already looks really good. There are some variations here and there, but this is what I came up with. I thought this was going to be a breeze, but it never is when you mix hardware and software. My e-ink screen had faulty connectors, which I had to solder up. The next issue was with the rotary encoders. They didn't register the same speeds. Without getting too technical, one of them was wired directly to the ESP32, which powers the screen, and then the second one was connected to an additional port, which was then wired back to the ESP32. It had to travel further, which meant it was slower. It took a while, but I eventually got both knobs working at the same speed using software. Since coding Etch A Sketch is a lot simpler than Nibbles, let's begin there. The only issue I ran into was with the refresh rate of the e-ink screen. If you have an e-reader at home, you might have realized there's a little bit of a lag when you switch pages, and that's exactly what's happening here. It's manageable, but it's also noticeable. Luckily, I can do a partial screen refresh, which is faster. This works great, and now it's time to attempt our circle. This is great, but after all this work, I still can't draw a circle, but that's on me. Now it's time to make my younger self proud of me by recoding the same thing I did 30 years ago. You know how I kept mixing up the controls in my Etch A Sketch? Well, I solved this in Nibbles by using only one knob. The idea is that you take the perspective of the snake. So if you rotate clockwise, you'll turn right, and if you rotate counterclockwise, you'll turn left. This is also known as tank controls, and it works well. Unlike my original prototype, the snake can move on its own. You can see a little bit of ghosting on the screen, but it doesn't matter, it's just how the e-ink screen works. I have one last game to show you. Here's Teka Snake 2, a two-player version of Snake. Since we already have two knobs, but we only need one to control the snake, that means we can have two snakes. Alright, and that's pretty much a wrap for this video. Thanks for watching, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, and all that fun stuff. I'm actually very happy with how this device turned out, and I might potentially upgrade it some more in the future, so stay tuned for that. I'll definitely need to get Pong working on this. If you have any other ideas for the TekaSketch, please let me know in the comments below. Until then, I'll see you sketch time. Ugh, that was bad, I should cut that.